Oh, Vince Russo. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Pro Wrestling Chat. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we're talking about the demise of WCW. And I will be posing the question to all of you out there is, did Vince Russo kill WCW? Now there's this great show going on Vice TV called Who Killed WCW? And it was produced by The Rock and made by the people who did Dark Side of the Ring and all that. A really good show, and it introduced some elements that maybe we didn't know about before, and it makes you think. Now, I knew when the third episode came out about the whole Vince Russo era of WCW. I knew it was going to get me all riled up again, get me pissed off, you know. And it did, and it prompted me to make this video as well. So, did Vince Russo kill WCW? Can't just blame him. There are several factors to the demise of WCW, I think, but to me, he is the biggest factor as to why WCW ultimately died, you know. Now, at the time before they brought him in, yeah, things were getting a little rocky. You know, they made some big mistakes. Vince took over from Eric Bischoff. So at the time, Eric Bischoff got fired because, you know, he had been taking his eye off the ball. And, yeah, he made several big mistakes. And not only that, as you saw in episode 2, he was fighting constantly with the corporate executives in WCW who wanted Nitro to be a more wholesome family program, where that goes against everything they were doing, you know. What made them so successful was the show was very edgy and raw and realistic. You never knew what was going to happen, that it was chaos, you know. And you can't do that if you're going to have a family-friendly show. So, you know, they butted heads and eventually they fired Eric Bischoff and sent him home. And I feel like at that time, yeah, even though things were a little rocky, they still had all kinds of great talent there in WCW. You had the legends like Hulk Hogan's, you had Sting, Ric Flair, and you had a lot of great younger talent as well, like, you know, Booker T and all that. Yeah, and even DDP, who was older, but he was just becoming a big star at that time. But yeah, it was far from being a complete abomination, which is what it had become by the time they closed the doors, you know. And once Vince Russo came in, who had been one of the head writers over in WWE, and you gotta give him credit, he did some great stuff over there. He was responsible for some of their big success. During the Attitude Era and at the height of the Monday Night Wars. Now granted, I've never been a huge fan of the Attitude Era per se. There was a lot of stuff going on there that I didn't like. And that's probably why I watched WCW all the time. I was a WCW guy. I didn't like a lot of the sleazy stuff that was going on. I didn't like the way they kind of presented women as objects, basically put them in the bra and panties and bikini matches, ridiculous stuff. And yeah, what I did like was stuff like Stone Cold and The Rock going on, just because they were such great talents and showing their awesome skills on the mic and their great work in the ring. You know, that's what I liked. Stuff like when they brought in Mike Tyson. I don't know if Vince Russo had anything to do with that, but that was awesome, you know. But stuff like that I like, but the storylines, not necessarily. But at any rate, they brought in Vince Russo and pretty much gave him the ball, you know, gave him like full creative reign, and they made him the head writer. And man, as soon as he came in, it just took a nosedive. It just went into a downward spiral into the abyss. Everything he did was terrible. All the storylines were terrible. Oh man. The only thing I was like mildly interested in is when they did the angle with the new blood, which was all the younger talents going up against the Millionaires Club, they called it, which is, you know, the older veterans that were the big stars that didn't want to give up their spots. I thought that was kind of interesting because, you know, there was some truth to that. Sometimes maybe the older veterans didn't want to give up their spot, and people blame that for, they blame them for holding back the younger talents from getting over. And that's one of the things that Vince Russo, to his credit, tried to do. He always wanted to bring the new, young, up-and-coming guys and bring them to the forefront and try and make them the stars. But the fact of the matter was, a lot of them were still very green, you know. And they weren't kind of ready for the prime time, except for maybe a couple, you know, like Booker T. I feel like he was ready. And that was one of the good things that he did, is he did try and elevate the younger talent, but so many of them weren't really ready. They were talented, but they weren't quite there yet, and he just wanted to push some of them to the moon, and it didn't work, you know. I feel like there's a way you can still use some of those great veterans that, you know, put them on the map without, you know, making them look like crap like he was doing. He took Hulk Hogan and made him Terry Bollea. He wasn't even Hulk Hogan anymore. He was just like himself, you know. Like, and that did not work. They had him going against Billy Kidman, you know. It was such a mismatch, you know. And they had him lose to Billy Kidman. And it meant nothing because he didn't get over, you know, he couldn't get over. And it was frustrating. So many stupid things he did, like the Judy Bagwell and a pole match. Stuff where he put himself to the forefront. And I even made the comment on that show that he was better than 80% of the WCW talent. What a bold statement. And it also made me laugh hysterically. He thinks that because of the fact that he was hated, that's why he was so much better than everybody. Yeah, he was hated, but not in a good way. People didn't love to hate him, like, say, they loved to hate Hollywood Hulk Hogan. But Hollywood Hulk Hogan was so entertaining to watch. Yeah, you hated him, but, you know, he was highly entertaining. He made you want to watch. You wanted to see him get his ass kicked or, you know, lose the championship or whatever, you know. Vince Russo just made you so mad to the point where you didn't want to watch the show. That's how bad he was. You hated him in a bad way, a way that hurt the business. Because you're taking up valuable airtime for people that you say you want these young people to get over. Then why the hell are you on screen going into business for yourself and trying to get yourself over? If you want to get the young people over, give them the mic. Put them in parts of major storylines, you know. If you think they're so great and so talented. But some of them were so green, and some of the characters that they gave these young people were just lame, you know. Man, the matches were still really good. You still had a lot of stuff, great stuff going on with some of the main event talent and, you know, the cruiserweights and all that. And yeah, some of the main events were good too, but then they'd screw them up sometime. Like, obviously, the Bash at the Beach was a huge one. And they kept making a lot of mistakes like that and blowing stuff, you know. And you had a good match like that. That could have been a big hit. A lot of people wanted to see Jeff Jarrett versus Hulk Hogan for the World Championship. Why? Because that was that whole big storyline. The new blood going against the Billionaires Club. That was kind of the culmination. People wanted to see that. And Jeff Jarrett just lays down in the middle of the ring, and, you know, Vince Russo just completely disrespects Hulk Hogan and throws the championship. Here, take it, and then get out of here. We're making Jeff Jarrett the new world championship. So out with the old and in with the new, but it didn't quite work that way, did it? All that did was make a mockery of the business. And I will say, I will give Vince Russo credit. I always blamed him for the David Arquette incident. Bringing David Arquette into the WCW because they had that movie, Ready to Rumble, that he starred in with, you know, a lot of the guys from WCW, like Sting and Goldberg and all that. So they brought him in and kind of made him part of the storyline, which is fine. You know, you're promoting the movie, okay, but they made David Arquette the world champion. I wanted to smash the screen. I wanted to destroy it because that was the biggest farce, the biggest facade I had ever seen in the history. I still think that's the most embarrassing moment in the history of professional wrestling. But it turns out that wasn't his idea originally. It turns out that was Tony Schiavone's idea. So, wow, that really struck me. I was like, wow, that was Tony Schiavone's idea? Well, first of all, why are you listening to a commentator anyway? But, you know, I still can't believe that he brought that in front of all the people in charge of creative, and all the corporate executives sat down along with Eric Bischoff, who did end up returning to the company. Why? Because Vince Russo was failing at his job. So they thought bringing in Eric Bischoff would help right the wrongs. You know, hopefully maybe if they worked together, they could make a comeback. But Eric Bischoff also approved this idea. So the fact that all the people in that room approved that idea is just like, what the F is wrong with these people? That shows right there what's wrong with this company. Why in the hell did they let this happen? I just can't, I still cannot believe it to this day. What a mockery, what an embarrassment. Oh, God. I just can't believe they went for that. I can't believe it. Anyway, so I have to forgive Vince Russo for that because it wasn't his idea originally. But Tony Schiavone, what is wrong with you? The only guy, apparently, that resisted it was DDP, if you watched the show. He was like, no, are you kidding me? You're ribbing me, right? You're joking me, right? This can't be real, right? But yeah, it's happening. So shame on you, Tony Schiavone. Should know better. I like Tony Schiavone, too. I like the work he's doing in AEW, by the way. But, at any rate, another thing that I was going to get into was the return of Eric Bischoff. I remember when they first announced that, I was like, oh, thank God, he's going to be our savior now, you know. Maybe now we can do something right and bring things in the right direction. And once he came on, I knew that his heart was not really in it. I could tell he was just in it for the money, to get a paycheck, because he already gave his heart and soul to the WCW, and it turned to crap, and he was distraught and depressed about it. He gave all he was gonna give, I think, at that point. I think he was done. I think he was just there for the paycheck, and you know. Also, I could tell he didn't like Vince Russo either, so they didn't get along. And, yeah, the incident with the bash at the beach was a big point of contention between Hulk Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo. You know, they couldn't agree on the finish or how that match was supposed to play out. And they ended up doing what they did, you know, and making another embarrassment of the wrestling world. Man. I will say one thing that almost saved it for me was the West Texas Rednecks with Kurt Hennig. He was so funny in that whole angle. The West Texas Rednecks, you know, rap is crap. When they had Master P come on there and Kurt Hennig gets in his face, he's just like, I don't understand this crap, this rap, it's a bunch of crap, you know. And he ends up getting this whole stable together, the West Texas Rednecks, and they do a whole big country show, you know, like a couple of the old good old boys making fun of rap. It was so funny. So that was one of the very few bright spots in that whole era. But yeah, sifting through all the garbage was tough, man. I was the hardest of hardcore fans just for the fact that I stayed and continued to watch it and be faithful to the WCW, even though at that point the WWE was much better at that time, you know. I mean, it was just unwatchable. That's how bad it was. So yeah, the thing is, if you blame the Time Warner and AOL merger, I mean, if there was a viable product there that was successful, they wouldn't be able to ignore it. Like all the years of success they had before that, the corporate executives didn't want wrestling on that channel either, but they couldn't ignore it because it was so successful. So when the success started dwindling, they wanted it out of there. And why did the success dwindle? Because of Vince Russo and the horrible storytelling, the horrible writing, and the horrible show that they were producing. You know, you can't blame all the corporate executives for that. You gotta blame the guy who's doing the writing, the creative. Also, you gotta blame Kevin Nash too, because that time where Eric Bischoff wasn't doing well, and you saw it in episode 2. Was Kevin Nash offered to take over creative, to be the booker for the show. So you had the inmate running the asylum. And what did he do? He booked himself to be the champion several times. And he booked himself to beat Goldberg, who was the hottest thing going at the time. So yeah, as soon as he got to head of creative, he took Goldberg right out of there because he didn't want anyone being a bigger star than he was. So he had to set him straight and just derailed the whole thing, you know. Goldberg was one of the few things keeping them on the map and keeping them prominent, because people loved Goldberg. He was the biggest star at that time, you know. Oh, man. It's just rough, you know. And they switched so many different bookers. They made Roddy Piper the president. They made Ric Flair the president. You know, given all these different on-air authority figures when Vince Russo wasn't working out, you know. And there you have it, you know. That is the reason, to me, the demise of WCW. The biggest thing for me is Vince Russo. Because I remember watching that whole thing with Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo, and they decided they were going to do a whole big reboot and strip every one of the championships. And, you know, like, what the hell? Sid Vicious was world champion. Like, you're just going to take the championship away from him? You know, what the hell is that? And none of it worked. None of it was worth it. And you can say another thing, though. Well, you know, a lot of the big talents left and went back to the WWE. Why is that? Because of the stories, the way they were being used creatively. That's why they left. It's not just because of money, it's the way they're being used and the way they're being presented on television was embarrassing. So yeah, of course they went back to WWE where they're going to find success. Like the first big crew to leave at the same time was, Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and Perry Saturn and Dean Malenko all left at the same time and showed up on Raw. And Chris Benoit had just literally been champion at the newest pay-per-view. Not to promote a murder, but, that was a big deal at the time. And, yeah. They were all considered like the backbone of WCW. They were the really super strong mid-carders that you knew they were going to put on clinics in the ring. They were just so talented, amazing athletes, and they were the backbone. So they lost their backbone. I think Eddie Guerrero was the one that said that on one of the documentaries. When they lost us, they lost their backbone, and there's a lot of truth to that. They lost their backbone. Yeah, so once they left, other people started leaving. The Big Show left, A lot of people started going back to WWE. That crossed over into WCW during the boom of the Monday Night Wars. So that has a lot to do with it too, but Vince Russo, once again, to me, is the reason why they left. The way they were being used. Bret Hart, the way he was being used was horrible. Everything they were doing was horrible. Goldberg was pissed off because they weren't using him right. They tried to make him a bad guy. That just did not work at all. And then he got injured, so he was out, was done for good, basically. It's just so sad looking back at it. And of course, when you look back at that Monday Nitro and how that went down, the last show, it was sad. It was really sad. And then even when they tried to resurrect it in the WWE with the whole invasion thing, you knew it was dead. You knew they were just going to phase it out, and they did. They didn't have to. They could have kept WCW alive and gave them like their own show, made it kind of a separate entity that they could cross over now and then. Why did it have to die completely, But that was Vince McMahon. He knew he crushed the competition and he wanted to wipe his hands and get rid of it. And he's making money off of it. I don't know if he is anymore, but, he made a lot of money off of it, selling all the DVDs and the compilations of WCW and all that. So he made a lot of money off, and he paid practically nothing. He paid, like, $1 million to buy WCW. It's just pathetic. But at any rate, that's my thoughts, guys. What do you think? Who do you think killed WCW? Do you think it was just one person? Do you think it was Eric Bischoff? Do you think it was Bischoff and Hulk Hogan together? A lot of people say that. Do you think it was, the older veterans trying to keep the young talent down? Do you think that's what caused it? Do you think it was Vince Russo single-handedly? Do you think it was the AOL Time Warner? Do you think it's just a bunch of factors, or do you think it's one big factor? So let me know in the comments below, and thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, the Pro Wrestling Chat. Tune in and lock up.